My son's iPad was sitting on the kitchen counter when it happened. He's 9 years old, and he left it plugged in next to the coffee maker like he always does. Face up, screen unlocked. Because kids that age don't think about privacy the way adults do. I walked past it to grab my mug, glanced down out of habit, and saw a notification pop up from an app I didn't recognize. The icon was a small flame. Orange. Familiar in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain had even finished processing what I was looking at. I picked up the iPad. I told myself I was just checking that my son hadn't downloaded something inappropriate. That's what fathers do. That's what I told myself. The account wasn't his. The name on the profile was Melanie K. The photos were my wife. I set my coffee mug down very carefully. I remember that detail, how slowly I placed it on the counter like I was afraid of breaking something. Everything else in the kitchen looked exactly the same. The dish towel folded over the oven handle, the grocery list on the refrigerator in my wife's handwriting, the crayon drawing my son had made in 2nd grade, still taped to the cabinet above the sink. My entire house looked completely normal, and I was standing in the middle of it holding proof that the last 11 years of my life had been built on something that wasn't real. Her name is my wife. We married when I was 34. I was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. She was a marketing director at a healthcare company downtown. We had a good life, not flashy, but solid. A 4-bedroom house in Westerville. 2 cars. Shared calendar on our phones. Date nights on Fridays when her schedule allowed. She traveled for work roughly once a month, sometimes more in the spring when her company ran regional conferences. My son was conceived on a trip to Asheville, North Carolina, the year before we got married. That's a detail I used to think of as romantic. I don't think about it the same way anymore. I scrolled through the app slowly, the way you move when you're afraid of what the next step will show you. Her profile said she was 36. She listed herself as single. The photos were recent. I recognized the blue blouse she'd worn to her company's holiday party in December, the one she'd asked me to help zip up before we left the house. The bio said she liked hiking and wine and people who can hold a real conversation. She'd written it herself. I knew her writing. There were matches, dozens of them. I put the iPad back on the counter exactly where my son had left it. I poured my coffee down the drain. I got in my car and drove to work and sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes before I trusted myself to walk into the building without anyone seeing something was wrong on my face. I didn't call her. I didn't send a text. I didn't do anything that afternoon except sit at my desk and stare at load calculations I'd already finished and think. I'm not a man who acts on impulse. My whole career is about stress tolerance, figuring out what a structure can bear, where the weak points are, what happens when the wrong kind of pressure gets applied at the wrong angle. I'd spent 15 years thinking that way professionally. I decided that afternoon that I was going to apply the same logic to this. I wasn't going to react until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. The first thing I did was figure out how the app had ended up on my son's iPad. My wife and I don't share an Apple ID. We set up separate accounts years ago when we got new phones. But my son's iPad was originally set up under her account, back when he was too young to have his own. She must have forgotten that. Or she never thought it would matter. The app had downloaded automatically when she installed it on her phone because of the shared account. The notification I saw was a mirroring glitch, the kind that happens sometimes with older iPads running newer software. She hadn't been careless on purpose. She'd just miscalculated one small technical detail. I spent the following 4 days watching and documenting without her knowing. Not because I enjoyed it, because I needed to understand the scope before I made any decisions. What I found was worse than I'd expected, and I had expected something bad. Her phone was locked with a 6-digit code she'd changed 8 months ago. But our home network router logs every device that connects. I have the admin password because I set up the router when we moved in. I spent one evening going through 3 months of connection logs, not reading messages, just seeing traffic patterns, volume, frequency, timing. She was communicating heavily with 2 numbers I didn't recognize. One of them spiked every time she was traveling. The other was consistent. Nearly every day, usually late morning while I was at work and my son was at school. I ran the second number through a reverse lookup service. It came back registered to a business account. The business name was a Property Management LLC, The registered agent was a man named Garrett Fowler. I knew that name. Garrett Fowler was the husband of my wife's closest friend, Dana. We'd had dinner with them 7 or 8 times over the past 2 years. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He drove a black Tahoe. He'd shaken my hand at a 4th of July barbecue the previous summer and asked me how the engineering business was going. I sat with that information for a long time. The other number, the one tied to her travel, I couldn't identify as easily. I eventually cross-referenced it with her expense reports. My wife kept digital copies in a shared folder on our home computer, originally set up for tax purposes. She filed mileage reimbursements, hotel receipts, meal expenses. I went back 14 months. There were patterns that shouldn't have been there. Hotel stays that lasted a day longer than the conferences she'd told me about. Meal receipts for 2 people at restaurants in cities where she was supposedly working alone. Once, a charge from a spa in Nashville that she'd told me was a team-building event. But the receipt showed a couple's package. I found a name attached to a conference registration in her email. She stayed logged in on the home computer, and I'm not proud of how I found it, but I needed to know. The name on the paired registration was a colleague named Trent Mosby. I looked him up. Regional sales director at a competing firm, 41 years old. LinkedIn showed they were connected. Mutual connections included 3 of her coworkers. So there were 2 of them, Garrett, the local one, consistent, close, practically embedded in our social life, and Trent, the travel one, who existed in the spaces she carved out when she was supposed to be working. The financial piece came next, and that's the part that shifted something in me from hurt to something colder. I pulled our joint credit card statements going back 18 months. I have access to those because they're under both our names. I went line by line. I'm an engineer. I like going line by line. I found $31,000 in charges I couldn't account for. Gifts from boutique stores I'd never seen her bring home. Restaurant charges on evenings she'd told me she was working late. 2 weekends she claimed were girls' trips. Charges placing her in Savannah, Georgia and Scottsdale, Arizona, at hotels that ran $400 a night, with room service for $31,000. Over 18 months. On a joint card that I was paying half of every month, she had used my own money to fund this. That's the detail I kept coming back to. Not the betrayal in the abstract, not the lies themselves, but the specific, practical reality that I had been sitting across from her at dinner, handing over my half of the credit card payment every month and funding the exact thing that was destroying us. I didn't sleep well for 5 days, but I didn't say a word to her. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney named Patricia Okafor, who a colleague had used 2 years earlier and described as methodical and unsentimental. I liked both of those qualities. I told her what I had. She told me Ohio is an equitable distribution state that documented marital waste, which is what the $31,000 qualified as under state law, could be factored into asset division. She told me to keep documenting. She told me not to confront my wife until I was ready to file. I told her I'd be ready in 10 days. The second call was to my father, who is 71 years old and lives 40 minutes outside of Columbus in a house he built himself. I drove to see him on a Saturday morning while my wife took our son to soccer practice. I sat in his kitchen and told him everything. He didn't say much for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" I told him I might need a place to stay for a few weeks. He said the guest room was already made up. He'd always kept it made up ever since my mother passed, as if he was always expecting company. I'd never asked him why before. I didn't ask him then either. The third call was to Dana, my wife's closest friend, the wife of Garrett Fowler. That was the hardest call. I went back and forth on whether to make it at all. Part of me said it wasn't my responsibility, that I should focus on my own situation and leave hers alone. But I kept thinking about the 4th of July barbecue. I kept thinking about Dana showing me pictures on her phone of a weekend trip she and my wife had taken together. A trip I now knew my wife had not actually taken with Dana. I thought about what Dana had said at dinner once, that she was glad our families were close, that it was rare to find people you could actually trust. She deserved to know. I kept the call short. I told her I had documentation. I told her the registered LLC number. I gave her the dates. I let her draw her own conclusions. She was quiet for a very long time after I stopped talking. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said less than 2 weeks. She said she'd suspected for about 4 months, but hadn't been able to prove it. We agreed we weren't going to tell either of them that we'd spoken. We both filed for divorce within the same 7-day window. The way my wife found out was not dramatic. I'd thought about whether I wanted it to be, whether I wanted a confrontation, a scene, some version of watching her face when she understood that everything had collapsed. I decided I didn't want that. Not because I was protecting her, because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of watching me be angry. Anger is emotional. What I felt by that point was not anger. It was something closer to clarity. I left the house on a Tuesday morning. My son was at school. My wife was in the shower. I had packed 2 bags over the previous weekend, moved them to my car in separate trips over 3 days so she wouldn't notice. I'd already transferred my direct deposit to a personal account I'd opened the week before. I'd already spoken to my son's school, quietly, to flag that there might be some changes at home. I left a single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. It said that I had filed for divorce, that my attorney would be in contact with hers, and that I had documentation of everything. It listed Patricia O'Coffer's name and number. That was all. Then I drove to my father's house. She called me 14 times in the first hour. I didn't answer. By the end of that first day, she had called 41 times. I texted her once. All communication goes through our attorneys from here. Nothing after that. I found out later, through Patricia, that she called Dana that evening looking for support. Dana didn't answer either. I imagine that was a different kind of shock. When you've been doing what she was doing, you start to think everyone around you is as comfortable with deception as you are. You forget that other people have their own information. The divorce process took 8 months. Ohio requires a 90-day waiting period, and ours was not a simple case. Patricia made sure of that. The marital waste argument held. The $31,000 in documented charges on the joint card, combined with a forensic accounting review of our shared finances that turned up an additional $8,400, I hadn't caught myself. A total of just over $39,000 was treated as dissipation of marital assets. The judge factored it into the property settlement. The equity I received from the house reflected that calculation. My wife had been counting on a 50-50 split of that equity. She did not get it. The custody arrangement settled at a schedule I could live with. My son lives primarily with me during the school week. He's with his mother on alternate weekends and for a stretch in the summer. He's doing okay. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, and kids are also very perceptive. He'd known something was wrong at home long before I'd confirmed it. He told me once, about 3 months after I moved out, that the house had felt too quiet for a while. I asked him what he meant. He said it was like when you're watching a movie and the music stops right before something happens. He's 9 years old. He noticed before I did. Garrett and Dana's divorce finalized about 6 weeks before mine did. She sold the house. He moved into an apartment near downtown. My wife and Garrett did not end up together. I don't know what happened there, and I stopped trying to find out. Whatever it was, it apparently didn't survive contact with the consequences. That's the thing about arrangements built entirely on deception. They depend on nothing ever being tested. Trent Mosby's wife called my attorney's office once during the proceedings, asking if I had documentation relevant to her own situation. Patricia referred her to her own counsel. I had given what I had. I wasn't going to carry anyone else's case. I'm in a different place now. Not better in the sense of everything being repaired. Some things don't repair. They just stop bleeding and turn into something you can carry. But different in the way that matters. I know now what I can absorb and still function. I know what my son needs from me. I know that my father's guest room is the first place I should have gone a long time ago on a hard Saturday morning. Not because anything there would have been easy, but because it was real. I still drive past the house sometimes, on the way to pick up my son. The dish towel is usually gone from the oven handle. The grocery list on the refrigerator has changed handwriting. She must have taken it down and put up her own. The crayon drawing is still in the window above the sink. I can see it from the driveway. My son drew that picture when he was 6. It shows 4 people, 2 adults, a kid, and a dog we don't have. But he'd been lobbying for, standing in front of a house that's slightly too tall for its yard, with a sun in the corner the size of a dinner plate. He wrote all 4 names across the top in green crayon, the letters a little uneven. The way they are when a child has just figured out that letters are something you can make yourself. He wrote my name first. I don't know if she kept the drawing for him or for herself, or just because it was taped up and she hadn't thought to take it down. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's still there, and when I pull into that driveway on a Wednesday afternoon and my son comes running out the front door with his backpack half unzipped and his shoes untied, the drawing is in the window behind him, and those 4 slightly uneven green letters that he put there when he was 6 years old are still the first thing that has my name on it that I see. You rebuild from what you know is real. You start with whatever survived. One day, one truth, one thing at a time.